Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Close Reading Poetry, a YouTube channel about the study of poetry and literature. My name's Adam Walker. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of English Literature at Harvard University. And in this video, I'd like to welcome you to the channel, talk a little bit about what the channel's about and what to expect in 2024. Also talk about some opportunities of studying poetry with me. And at the end of the video, I'd like to be transparent about my own ideals that underlie my literary study, what I think the value of literary study is, so you have a better sense of where I'm coming from in many of my videos. Well, recently I published a video, a list of poems and poets that I think everyone should read if they're going to have a comprehensive view of the English tradition of poetry. However, that list was not comprehensive. It was not representative of the entire canon or traditions. I don't really believe in a canon. I guess I believe in traditions of English literature. Left off a lot of poets. A lot of poets who should have been on there simply didn't make it. However, I do think that it does represent a good starting place. It's not going to be the destination, but these recommendations are like signposts to lead you on to greater literary discovery. If you're new to poetry, even though that list was short, if you're new to poetry, it was probably overwhelming. Had a huge list of poets on there, primary reading, and a pretty sizable list of secondary readings as well. And these secondary readings included books that were either expensive or out of print currently, we have to find them used online, or just difficult to navigate as a novice. So for 2024, I'm putting together a series of lectures that will survey the list, beginning with the Bible and classical backgrounds of English poetry, and leading all the way up to contemporary poets of today. That way, for those of you who don't have the books or can't buy them all or can't find them all online, will at least have a version of it, an introduction to these major periods of poetry from Old English, Middle English, all the way up to contemporary poets. These lectures will distill the list and the secondary sources on the list into lectures. So they'll synthesize all of that and hopefully will give you a better idea of what you might want to buy and what your own literary tastes are when it comes to poetry in English. Now, I do have a Patreon account now where I have some exclusive opportunities, like meeting together over Zoom, doing office hours, the occasional live lecture. We'll meet for poets' birthdays. Byron's birthday is coming up January 22nd. Langston Hughes' birthday is February 1st, so we'll meet together to read their poems, to celebrate their poetry and the works of these figures. It'll be an informal gathering. We'll do events like that on Patreon. I'm still trying to figure out Patreon. However, one thing that I don't want to do on Patreon is none of my content will ever be exclusive. I'm very interested in making literary study more accessible, so if ever I have a lecture, it's going to be published for free. However, offering these opportunities on Patreon will allow my work to be supported, and through that I'll be able to give more attention to the YouTube channel. So those are those opportunities. You should check out Patreon and see what's posted. I'll update it regularly with opportunities. The other thing is that if you'd like to take a course with me, I sometimes volunteer a course or a reading group with the Antrim Literature Project. The Antrim Literature Project is a public humanities platform that aims to make the study of literature more accessible to people beyond the paywalls of the university. So you can take a course with me or with other graduate student volunteers. We're basically a volunteer basis platform interested in just promoting the study and love of literature. And so if you'd like to check that out, see what's offered, you can go to antrimliteratureproject.org. You can check out the link in the description below to see what's being offered. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my own attitude toward studying literature. My attitude is summed up in what might be called a Pietas literaria, a literary piety. And I use the Latin here not to be pretentious, but to signal toward the wider sense of pietas as not exclusively religious, but involving a sense of wonder, a sense of reverence, a sense of awe, a sense of duty, of filial love that the Romans had of pietas. And this is certainly the way Samuel Johnson, the great 18th century critic, viewed literary study. In a memorandum written on Good Friday, 1779, he wrote that he hoped that his Lives of the English Poets were written in such a manner as may tend to the promotion of piety. Now, by piety, Johnson didn't mean that he hoped that his great works, the lives of the English poets, would further the Church of England or any specific religion. He was interested in promoting a sense of communal reverence for literature, which transcends past, present, and future. A sense of ongoing writing that we as readers participate in, and as teachers of literature and writers of literature, and anyone who thinks about literature. They all participate in this furthering of a tradition. So it's in that sense that I say my attitude is Pietas Literaria. But I'd like to outline 4 main principles for literary study that govern the work that I do here on this channel. Before I do, let me just read you a quotation from Helen Vendler. This is a quotation that's often in my mind. In 1980, in her presidential address to the MLA, she addressed her fellow scholars with these words: "I would wish for all of us scholars a steady memory of the time when we were not yet scholars, before we knew what research libraries or variorum editions were, before we had heard any critical terms, before we had seen a text with footnotes. It was in those innocent days that our attachment to literature arose, from reading a novel or a poem or from seeing a play. In every true reading of literature in adult life, we revert to that early attitude of entire receptivity and plasticity and innocence before the text. Though the state of reading, like that of listening to a piece of music, is one of intense attention, it is not one of scholarly or critical reflection. It is a state in which the text works on us, not we on it." I think that's helpful to remember, and that has been helpful for me to remember. A lot of professors of literature, those who are in the profession of literature, risk the danger of losing sight of that love, especially in graduate school. There's an uneasiness about talking about any kind of love whatsoever, as though it might be naive. And so many students and academics feel the need, for whatever reason, to hide their love of literature in complex jargon and technical terms, and eventually it eclipses their entire love for it entirely. I think that that's the danger. But I think it's important to keep in mind, keep in remembrance this before us, that literary experience is at the heart of what we do as readers. And for those of us who teach, it's what we do as teachers and what we should keep in mind. Vendler's not against scholarship. She's not against the academy. She's not anti-institutional. But she is saying, rightly, I think, that all literary investigation of whatever kind should begin with that innocent, true reading of literature, that imaginative encounter with it, through the experience itself, not merely by the intellect, but through the imagination. I think that's what's important. So let's go through the principles here. The first principle is a reverence for human life and experience. I think that's at the heart of every literary encounter and the value of literary study. I'd like to read just a brief quotation from Walter Jackson Bates, The Achievement of Samuel Johnson, which is an excellent book, by the way. He writes, "We also want the healthful assurance and actual concrete display that to pick one's way through the large, chaotic body of humankind's literature, evaluating and getting anything out of it, involves first of all the use of the same qualities of mind needed to extract any point or meaning from life itself. This, indeed, as the Greeks saw it, is the great justification of the humanities. This is what gives them their dignity, their consistent relevance." What he's saying here is that to find any meaning or beauty in a poem or a novel or a play will exercise the same faculties of mind that will enable you to make any meaning and beauty out of your own experience in your own life. And part of what I'm doing here with the close reading videos is not merely to dissect a poem in its constituent parts and to lay it out on the table and kill it, but rather to show what language arts can do, and that there's a correlation between one's ability to appreciate and love literature and one's ability to appreciate and love one's own life. And I think evaluating literature, reading it, analyzing it, appreciating and evaluating it will help us to do the same for our own life and for the lives of others. So a reverence for human life and experience is the first principle of Pietas Literaria. The second is a love for language. The literary profession is very different from other humanities. It's not like history or philosophy. Literary study exists, as Christopher Ricks says, in the same medium as its subject. And this may seem like a rather obvious statement. We talk about language through language, but it's something that none of the other humanities do. And that's not to disparage philosophy or history, but sometimes people approach poetry and literary study as though a literary text can merely be appreciated by understanding the idea, the distillation of the feelings and the thoughts behind it. That's important, but what's as equally important is the way those thoughts and ideas come dressed in language. One of the functions of poetry is to order the chaos of human experience into uniquely disciplined verbal events. And that organization doesn't just happen through composition by the poet or the writer, but from the reader as well. That ties in with the first principle. And I've seen this have a profound effect upon students once they begin to see language and to appreciate literary arts. The more their writing and their speaking improves, they're less likely to hide underdeveloped thoughts in complex language. They're less likely to be dishonest, whether intentionally or not. And they're more likely to consider writing for what it is, which is a conversation between human beings. Writing just doesn't happen in a vacuum. We don't publish, we don't write, we don't speak just to pad our CVs and to make ourselves look smarter and to earn degrees. No, we write to participate in a conversation between other humans, and this conversation must necessarily happen through language. So the third principle of Pietas Literaria is a commitment to community. It affirms the idea that individual and private reading and writing does not happen in a vacuum, but is intrinsically within a community. And literary experience is this way as well, as C.S. Lewis says in his book, An Experiment in Criticism. And I just want to read a passage from C.S. Lewis. He writes that literary experience heals the wound without undermining the privilege of individuality. There are mass emotions which heal the wound, but they destroy the privilege. In reading great literature, I become 1,000 men or women, and yet remain myself. Like the night sky in the Greek poem, I see with a myriad of eyes, but it is still I who see. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself and am never more myself than when I do. So this commitment to community really enriches, it values dialogue and diversity, it promotes academic excellence in the pursuit of truth, and it also affirms the fact that individual reading is intrinsically a communal experience. Reading well enables one to see and to move beyond oneself into the natural world, into the inanimate world of objects, of animals, of other humans, of the spiritual, of the complex inner experiences of humanity. All of these things are enabled and widened, dilated by literary experience. It helps us aim and to move toward collective goals, and it enables readers like you and I to participate in the search for wisdom to which men and women have committed themselves through language for centuries. And the fourth principle is a duty for public good, the greater good of society and humanity more broadly. This principle imagines literary engagement as public-facing, as not something to be done isolated, monastically in the walls of the academy, the ivory tower even. It should be done with everyone. It should be imagined as such. I think there is a fiction surrounding literary studies that it's very monastic, and that's not the way it should be. It should hold on to this communal aspect of it and this greater good. I just want to read from a passage from James Ingle's The Committed Word. I had the honor of studying under James Ingle, and this book is just full of great humanist wisdom about literature and literary study. And I just want to read you just a brief passage of Ingle writes that each generation, each individual, needs again to be led out of the world, to discover in the world what has already been imagined into reality, and then to imagine more. To imagine more, you kind of need to know what has already been imagined to an extent. I often think of Virgil's Aeneid, where you have Aeneas fleeing the burning city of Troy, which is being sacked by the Greeks. And as he's escaping, he has Priam's sword by his side, but he also has on his back, carrying his aged father and leading by the hand his young son. And I think this is a picture of the ideal of literary studies. It bears the burden of the past and moves forward for the benefit of posterity. And I think that that's something that we all participate in as readers. Anyone who's reading books, talking about literature, talking about ideas and language, they're participating in that furthering of wisdom and the efforts to learn what has been imagined and to imagine more, as Ingalls says. Samuel Taylor Coleridge had the idea of a clerisy, an educated class of not just poets and scholars and philosophers, but also readers. The idea that reading is intrinsically public. Coleridge thought it was necessary to create a secular society of poets, philosophers, and scholars who would diffuse through the whole community wisdom, traditions of wisdom and of knowledge, in order to keep that community moving forward. And I think that's something that literary studies will have to do in the 21st century. There's a very stark portrayal of the future imagined by Jules Verne in his unfinished novel titled Paris in the 20th Century. And basically, this dystopic reality that he imagines involves all the STEM majors, the scientists, the mathematicians, the engineers, all of which is very important. They all live on top of the world. They live above ground, but beneath the ground are the humanities people, the classic scholars and readers and artists. They do not exist in the above world, and so there's this divide. And in a way, with the commodification of education in the past several decades in America, and the deprecation of literature and the study of literature, whether in the university or outside of it, I think is tending towards that vision. And what we need in this age is something more of grounded in humanities, in the human experience, which is collective and not exclusively individual. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of some of the values that underline my own work, but that might also inform and guide you as you study more literature and encounter these literary experiences of your own, and as you learn what has been imagined and go on to imagine more. So thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to getting to know you all this year, and I'll see you all in the next video.